The rain hammered against the windshield like 1,000 tiny fists, and Marcus Williams gripped the steering wheel of his 18-wheeler with white-knuckled determination. The wipers struggled against the deluge, barely clearing his view of the dark highway stretching before him. He'd been driving for 14 hours straight, pushing through the Tennessee mountains toward Nashville, trying to make his delivery deadline despite the weather's best efforts to slow him down. At 52 years old, Marcus had spent more than half his life behind this wheel. He knew every curve of Interstate 40, every truck stop, every greasy spoon diner that served coffee strong enough to keep a man awake through the darkest hours. But tonight felt different. There was something in the air, something beyond the electricity of the storm, that made his skin prickle with unease. The dashboard clock read 11:47 when he saw it. A flicker of movement on the shoulder of the road, barely visible through the curtain of rain. His headlights swept across the shape, and his heart nearly stopped. A child, a little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, standing alone in the pouring rain. Marcus slammed on the brakes, the massive truck groaning in protest as it shuddered to a stop. His mind raced through 100 possibilities, each one worse than the last. An accident, a kidnapping, a family stranded somewhere nearby. None of them good. He grabbed his jacket from the passenger seat and threw open the door, the rain immediately soaking through his clothes. The cold bit into his bones as he jumped down from the cab and ran toward the small figure. The girl stood perfectly still, her dark hair plastered to her face, her thin dress clinging to her shivering body. She couldn't have weighed more than 50 pounds, and she looked up at Marcus with eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. Brown eyes, deep and desperate, filled with a determination that stopped him in his tracks. "Hey there, sweetheart," Marcus said, crouching down to her level despite the rain pounding against his back. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The girl didn't answer. Instead, she reached out with a tiny, trembling hand and grabbed the sleeve of his jacket. Her grip was surprisingly strong, and she pulled him closer until her lips were near his ear. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Please, save my mother." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He looked into the girl's eyes and saw something he recognized all too well. Fear. The kind of fear that comes from watching someone you love slip away. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "Where's your mother?" The girl pointed into the darkness beyond the guardrail, toward a steep embankment that disappeared into the woods below. "Down there. Our car went off the road. She's hurt. She told me to find help, but no one would stop. No one would help us." Marcus felt his stomach drop. How long had this child been standing here, soaked to the bone, watching car after car pass by without slowing down? How long had her mother been lying injured at the bottom of that ravine? "Okay," he said, taking off his jacket and wrapping it around her shoulders. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," she said. "Lily Chen." "Lily, I'm Marcus. I'm going to help you and your mother, I promise. But first, I need you to come with me to my truck where it's warm and dry. Can you do that?" Lily hesitated, her eyes darting between Marcus and the embankment. "But my mom—" "I know, baby, I know. But I can't help her if you get sick out here in this rain. Come on." He scooped her up in his arms, feeling how light she was, how fragile. She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face against his shoulder, and Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He carried her to the truck and lifted her into the cab, cranking up the heat as high as it would go. There was an old blanket behind the seat, kept there for emergencies exactly like this one, and he wrapped it around her shivering form. "Stay here," he said, reaching for his flashlight and the first aid kit he always kept under the seat. "I'm going to get your mother." "Don't leave me," Lily whispered, her voice cracking. "Please don't leave me alone." Marcus paused, his hand on the door. The fear in her voice was palpable, and he understood it. He understood what it was like to be small and scared and utterly alone in a world that seemed designed to hurt you. "I'll be right back," he said firmly. "I promise you, Lily. I will come back, and I'll bring your mother with me." He jumped back out into the rain and ran to the guardrail, shining his flashlight down the embankment. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the twisted wreckage of a silver sedan about 40 feet below. The car had flipped onto its side, coming to rest against a thick oak tree that had probably saved it from rolling further into the ravine. Marcus didn't hesitate. He climbed over the guardrail and started down the slope, his boots slipping on the wet leaves and mud. Every step was treacherous, the rain making the ground as slick as ice, but he kept going. He had to. There was a mother down there who needed him, a little girl up in his truck who was counting on him. He reached the car and dropped to his knees beside the driver's side window, which was now facing the sky. The glass was shattered, and through the opening he could see a woman slumped against the steering wheel, her dark hair matted with blood. "Ma'am!" he called out, reaching through the window to touch her shoulder. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The woman stirred, letting out a soft moan. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, and she tried to lift her head. "Don't move," Marcus said quickly. "You've been in an accident. I'm here to help. Your daughter Lily found me. She's safe in my truck." At the mention of her daughter's name, the woman's eyes snapped into focus. "Lily," she gasped. "Is she okay? Is she hurt?" "She's fine. Cold and scared, but she's fine. She's a brave little girl. She stood out there in the rain until someone stopped to help. That someone is me." Tears mixed with the rain on the woman's face. "I told her to go. I told her to find help. I was afraid I was going to. I was afraid she'd have to watch me." "Hey, none of that," Marcus said firmly. "You're going to be okay. We're going to get you out of here. Can you tell me where you're hurt?" The woman took a shaky breath. "My leg. I think it's broken. And my head. I hit my head when we flipped." Marcus assessed the situation quickly. The door was jammed, the frame twisted from the impact. He couldn't open it from outside, and trying to pull her through the window could make her injuries worse. "I'm going to call for help," he said, pulling out his phone. No signal. Of course, they were in the mountains, in the middle of a storm, miles from anywhere. "Okay, new plan. I'm going to try to get this door open. It might take a few minutes, but I'm not leaving you here." He climbed on top of the overturned car, his feet finding purchase on the slick metal, and positioned himself over the door. It was jammed tight, the frame bent inward from the collision. Marcus took a deep breath and began to pull, his muscles straining against the twisted metal. Nothing happened. The door didn't budge. He tried again, pulling harder this time, putting every ounce of strength he had into the effort. Still nothing. Marcus sat back, breathing hard, and looked around for another option. His flashlight beam caught something in the wreckage. A tire iron, thrown free from the trunk during the crash, lying in the mud a few feet away. He grabbed it and wedged it into the gap between the door and the frame, using it as a lever. He put his weight on the iron, pushing down with everything he had, and felt the metal begin to give. With a screech of protest, the door popped open. Marcus tossed the tire iron aside and reached down into the car. "Okay, I'm going to help you out now. This is probably going to hurt, and I'm sorry for that. But we need to get you somewhere warm and dry." The woman nodded, her jaw set with determination despite the pain. "Do it." He slid his arms under her shoulders and began to lift, careful to keep her injured leg as straight as possible. She cried out as he moved her, a sound that cut through the rain like a knife, but she didn't fight him. She trusted him, this stranger who had appeared out of the darkness to save her. It took nearly 15 minutes to get her out of the car and up the embankment. Marcus carried her on his back, her arms wrapped around his neck, her face pressed against his shoulder. Every step was agony, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming for rest, but he kept going, one foot in front of the other, just like he'd done his entire life. When they finally reached the top, Lily was standing at the guardrail, the blanket clutched around her shoulders, her face pale with worry. "Mommy!" she cried, running toward them. "Careful, baby," the woman said weakly. "I'm okay." "I'm okay." Marcus carried her to the truck and laid her gently on the bed, in the sleeper cab behind the main seats. It wasn't much, just a narrow mattress where he sometimes caught a few hours of sleep during long hauls, but it was warm and dry, and right now, that was all that mattered. Lily climbed up beside her mother, pressing herself against her side, and the woman wrapped an arm around her daughter, despite the pain it must have caused. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at Marcus with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for stopping. No one else would stop." Marcus shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." "No," the woman said firmly. "They wouldn't. We were out there for almost an hour. Dozens of cars passed us. Not one of them stopped. You were the only one." The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. He thought about all the times in his life when he'd needed help and no one had come, all the times he'd been passed by, ignored, forgotten. He understood what it felt like to be invisible, to be nothing more than an obstacle in someone else's path. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "I guess I'm just stubborn that way. Now, let's get you to a hospital. There's one about 20 miles up the road. We'll be there in no time." He climbed into the driver's seat and put the truck in gear, pulling carefully back onto the highway. The rain was beginning to let up, the worst of the storm passing over the mountains and heading east. Through the breaks in the clouds, Marcus could see a few stars beginning to appear, pinpricks of light in the darkness. "What's your name?" Lily asked from the back, her voice small but curious. "Marcus. Marcus Williams." "That's a nice name. Are you a truck driver?" "That's right. Been driving trucks for almost 30 years now. Wow, that's a really long time. Do you like it?" Marcus considered the question as he navigated the wet highway. Did he like it? He'd never really thought about it in those terms. Driving was just what he did. It was who he was. But was it what he liked? "Sometimes," he said finally. "It gets lonely out here, being on the road all the time. But tonight, I'm glad I was here. If I hadn't been driving this route at this exact time, I wouldn't have found you and your mom." "Maybe it was meant to be," Lily said seriously. "My mom always says that everything happens for a reason." Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror at the little girl, wrapped in his blanket, pressed against her injured mother. There was something about her that reminded him of someone, though he couldn't quite place who. "Maybe she's right," he said softly. "Maybe she's right." The hospital in Crossville was small but well equipped, and the emergency room staff sprang into action the moment Marcus carried the woman through the doors. They loaded her onto a stretcher and whisked her away for x-rays and evaluation, leaving Marcus and Lily in the waiting room with nothing to do but wait. Marcus bought Lily a hot chocolate from the vending machine and a bag of chips, the only food available at this hour. She ate hungrily, and he realized she probably hadn't had anything to eat since the accident. "When did your car go off the road?" he asked, settling into the plastic chair beside her. "I don't know," Lily said between bites. "It was still light outside, maybe around 6. We were driving to see my grandma in Nashville. She's sick, and my mom wanted to be there for her." Marcus did the math in his head. 6 o'clock. That meant they'd been stranded for almost 6 hours before he found them. 6 hours in the rain, in the cold, in the dark. It was a miracle they were both still alive. "Your grandma's sick?" he asked gently. Lily nodded, her face falling. "She has cancer. That's why we moved here from California, so my mom could take care of her. My mom says family is the most important thing in the world. She sounds like a smart woman." She is. She's the smartest person I know. She teaches me everything. Like how to read and how to do math and how to be brave even when you're scared. Lily looked up at Marcus with those two old eyes. I was really scared tonight, but I remembered what my mom said about being brave, and I kept walking until I found you. Marcus felt his throat tighten. You were very brave, Lily, the bravest person I've ever met. Lily smiled just a little and leaned her head against his arm. Within minutes, she was asleep, exhausted from the ordeal. Marcus sat perfectly still, afraid to move and wake her, watching the rise and fall of her small chest as she breathed. He thought about his own daughter, the one he hadn't seen in 15 years. She'd be 23 now, a grown woman, probably with a family of her own. He wondered if she looked anything like Lily. He wondered if she ever thought about him, the father who'd left when she was 8 years old, too broken and too scared to face his own failures. The divorce had been ugly. His wife had accused him of caring more about the road than his family, and the worst part was, she'd been right. He'd been a ghost in his own home, always leaving, always coming back too late, always missing the moments that mattered. Birthday parties, school plays, first words and first steps. He'd missed them all, and by the time he realized what he'd lost, it was too late to get it back. His daughter had been 8 years old the last time he saw her, the same age as Lily. She'd stood in the doorway of their apartment, tears streaming down her face, begging him not to go. And he'd gone anyway because that's what he did. He ran. He always ran. Marcus looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully against his arm, and felt something crack open inside his chest. A wall he'd built years ago, brick by brick, to protect himself from the pain of what he'd lost. He'd told himself he was doing them a favor by staying away. He'd told himself they were better off without him. But sitting here now, with this little girl who had reminded him so much of his own daughter, he wondered if he'd been wrong all along. A nurse appeared in the doorway of the waiting room, and Marcus gently shook Lily awake. "Hey, sweetheart. I think they have news about your mom." Lily sat up instantly, all traces of sleep vanishing from her face. They followed the nurse down a long corridor to a room where Lily's mother was propped up in a hospital bed, her leg in a cast, a bandage wrapped around her head. "Mommy!" Lily ran to the bed and climbed up beside her, wrapping her arms around her mother's neck. "Careful, baby," the woman said, but she was smiling, tears of relief streaming down her face. "I'm okay. I'm going to be okay." Marcus stood in the doorway, suddenly feeling like an intruder in this private moment. He started to back away, to slip out unnoticed, but the woman's voice stopped him. "Marcus, wait." He turned back to face her. "Please," she said. "Come in. I don't even know your full name, and you saved our lives." "Marcus Williams," he said, stepping into the room. "And I didn't do anything special. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "You did something special," the woman insisted. "You stopped. That's more than anyone else did." She shifted in the bed, wincing slightly, and held out her hand. "I'm Sarah. Sarah Chen. And I will never be able to repay what you did for us tonight." Marcus took her hand and shook it gently. "You don't owe me anything, Sarah. Just take care of yourself and that brave little girl of yours." Sarah smiled, but there was something in her eyes, something questioning. "The doctor says I'll be here for at least a couple of days. They want to monitor me for a concussion, and my leg needs surgery tomorrow to set the bone properly. My mother's in a nursing home in Nashville, and I don't have anyone else nearby. No family, no friends in this state. We only moved here 3 months ago." Marcus understood what she was asking, even if she couldn't bring herself to say the words. "I have a delivery deadline in Nashville," he said slowly. "But after that, I could come back, check on you, make sure you're okay." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that for strangers?" "You're not strangers anymore," Marcus said simply. "Lily's my friend now. Aren't you, Lily?" Lily nodded vigorously, her face breaking into a wide smile. "Marcus is the best truck driver in the whole world." Marcus laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised even him. How long had it been since he'd laughed like that? He couldn't remember. "I'll be back tomorrow evening," he said, "after I make my delivery. And if you need anything before then, you have the hospital call me." He pulled out a business card from his wallet, an old one from the trucking company, and scribbled his personal cell number on the back. "Any time, day or night, okay?" Sarah took the card and held it to her chest like it was something precious. "Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for everything." He nodded and turned to leave, but Lily's voice stopped him at the door. "Marcus?" He looked back at her. "You promise you'll come back? You really promise?" Marcus thought about all the promises he'd made in his life, all the ones he'd broken. He thought about his daughter standing in that doorway 15 years ago, begging him to stay. He thought about all the chances he'd missed, all the opportunities he'd thrown away. "I promise," he said, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he meant it. The drive to Nashville was quieter without Lily's chatter, but Marcus didn't mind. He had a lot to think about, and the empty cab gave him the space to do it. The storm had passed completely now, leaving behind a sky full of stars and a crescent moon that hung low over the mountains. He thought about Sarah, lying in that hospital bed with her leg in a cast and her head wrapped in bandages. He thought about Lily, so small and so brave, standing in the rain waiting for someone to help. He thought about his own daughter, and about all the years he'd wasted running from his past instead of facing it. The delivery went smoothly, the warehouse workers unloading his cargo with practiced efficiency. By the time Marcus finished the paperwork and collected his payment, it was almost 7 in the morning. He found a diner near the highway and ordered the biggest breakfast on the menu, suddenly ravenous after the long night. As he ate, he pulled out his phone and stared at the screen. There was a number saved in his contacts that he hadn't called in years. His ex-wife's number, the number that might, if he was lucky, still connect him to his daughter. His thumb hovered over the call button, trembling slightly. What would he say? How do you apologize for 15 years of absence? How do you explain to someone that you were too broken, too scared, too lost to be the father they needed? He put the phone down and picked up his coffee instead, taking a long sip of the bitter brew. Not today, not yet. He wasn't ready. But for the first time in a very long time, he thought he might be getting there. Marcus drove back to Crossville that afternoon, stopping at a toy store on the way to pick up a stuffed animal for Lily. It was a small brown bear with a red bow around its neck, soft and cuddly, the kind of thing a little girl might like. He felt awkward buying it, like he was overstepping some invisible boundary, but he couldn't shake the image of Lily standing in the rain, cold and scared and alone. When he arrived at the hospital, Sarah was awake and looking better than she had the night before. There was more color in her cheeks, and though she was still clearly in pain, her eyes were brighter. "You came back," she said, sounding surprised despite his promise. "I told you I would." Lily was curled up in a chair by the window, reading a tattered picture book from the hospital's collection. She looked up when Marcus entered, and her face lit up with a smile that made his heart ache. "Marcus, you're here." He held up the stuffed bear. "I brought you something." Lily scrambled out of the chair and ran to him, taking the bear with reverent hands. "He's beautiful," she breathed, hugging it to her chest. "I'm going to name him Marcus, after you." Marcus laughed, that same surprised laugh from the night before. "I'm honored." He pulled up a chair beside Sarah's bed and asked about her surgery, which had gone well. The doctors were optimistic about her recovery, though she'd need physical therapy for several months. The real challenge, Sarah admitted, was figuring out what to do next. "I can't work with a broken leg," she said, her voice heavy with worry. "I was barely making ends meet before the accident. Now with medical bills and no income, I don't know what I'm going to do." "What kind of work do you do?" Marcus asked. "I was a legal secretary back in California. When we moved here, I took a job at a law firm in Knoxville. But they've already called to say they're going to have to replace me since I'll be out for so long." She laughed bitterly. 3 months at that job, and I'm already unemployed again. Marcus thought for a moment. "What about your mother? Can she help?" Sarah shook her head. "Mom's in a nursing home. She has advanced Alzheimer's. She doesn't even know who I am most days. The nursing home takes almost all of her social security, and I've been using my savings to cover the rest. I'm down to almost nothing." The weight of her situation settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. A single mother with no family, no job, no savings, and a broken leg. A sick mother in a nursing home. A little girl who depended on her for everything. How was she supposed to survive this? "I want to help," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Sarah looked at him with surprise, and something that might have been suspicion. "Why?" "Because someone should. Because you need help, and I'm in a position to give it." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Look, I know this is strange. We just met, and I'm nobody to you. But I've got a good job, I've got savings, and I don't have anyone to spend them on. Let me help, at least until you're back on your feet." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I can't accept that. It's too much. You don't even know us." "I know enough. I know you're a good mother who loves her daughter. I know Lily is one of the bravest kids I've ever met, and I know that if the situation were reversed, you'd probably do the same thing." He reached out and touched her hand gently. "Let me help, Sarah. Please." The silence stretched between them, heavy with uncertainty. Finally, Sarah nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, but it's a loan. When I'm back on my feet, I'm paying you back every penny." Marcus smiled. "We'll work out the details later. For now, just focus on getting better." He stayed at the hospital until visiting hours ended, talking with Sarah about her life in California, her mother's illness, her dreams for Lily's future. She was a remarkable woman, strong and resilient despite everything life had thrown at her. She'd raised Lily alone after her husband had been killed in a car accident when Lily was only 2. She'd cared for her mother through the early stages of Alzheimer's while working full-time. She'd uprooted her entire life and moved across the country to be closer to her mother when the disease progressed. And through it all, she'd never stopped fighting, never stopped hoping. Marcus found himself drawn to her in a way he hadn't expected. Not romantically, not exactly, but something deeper. She reminded him of the person he'd always wanted to be, the person he might have been if he'd made different choices. When he finally left the hospital, it was dark outside, the stars just beginning to appear in the sky. He sat in his truck for a long moment, staring up at the night, thinking about everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. He thought about the little girl, standing in the rain, her hand gripping his sleeve, her voice whispering those words that had changed everything. "Please, save my mother." And he thought about his own daughter, waiting all those years for a father who never came back. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed the number he'd been too scared to call that morning. It rang once, twice, 3 times. He was about to hang up when a voice answered. "Hello?" It was a woman's voice. Young, unfamiliar, but something in it made his heart skip a beat. "Hello," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm looking for Emily Williams. This is her father." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, so long that Marcus thought the call had been disconnected. Then, "Dad!" That single word, spoken in a voice that was somehow both foreign and achingly familiar, broke something open inside him. 15 years of walls came crashing down, and Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. "Yeah, baby," he said, his voice cracking. "It's me. It's Dad." The conversation that followed was long and painful and beautiful all at once. Emily had a lot of questions, a lot of anger, a lot of hurt that she'd been carrying for more than half her life. Marcus answered as honestly as he could, not making excuses, not trying to justify his actions. He simply told her the truth, that he'd been a coward, that he'd run away because he didn't know how to be the father she needed, that he'd regretted it every single day since. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said finally. "I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry and that I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was too broken to show it." Emily was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said finally. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm glad you called. I've wondered about you for a long time, whether you were alive, whether you ever thought about me." "Every day," Marcus said. "Every single day." They talked for another hour, catching up on the years they'd missed. Emily was married now, with a little boy named Oliver, who was just learning to walk. She'd become a nurse, working at a hospital in Denver. Her mother had remarried years ago and was happy. "I want to meet you," Emily said finally. "Not right away. I need some time to process this, but eventually, maybe in a few months. Whenever you're ready," Marcus said, "I'll be here." When they finally hung up, Marcus sat in the dark cab of his truck and cried. Not from sadness, but from something else entirely. Something that felt like the first rays of sun after a very long night. Hope. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Marcus had experienced in years. He rearranged his driving schedule to stay close to Tennessee, taking shorter hauls that allowed him to visit Sarah and Lily regularly. He helped them move from the hospital to a small apartment in Nashville, closer to Sarah's mother's nursing home. He set up the furniture, stocked the refrigerator, and made sure they had everything they needed. Sarah's leg was healing well, though she still needed a wheelchair to get around. Physical therapy was grueling, but she tackled it with the same determination she brought to everything else. Lily had enrolled in the local elementary school and was already making friends. Her natural curiosity and outgoing personality winning over her classmates. Marcus found himself looking forward to his visits with an eagerness that surprised him. He'd never been good at relationships, had always kept people at arm's length to protect himself from the pain of losing them. But with Sarah and Lily, something was different. They'd already seen him at his best on that rainy night when he'd climbed down into a ravine to save them. They knew what he was capable of, and they still wanted him around. One evening, about a month after the accident, Marcus arrived at the apartment to find Lily waiting at the door with an envelope in her hand. "This is for you," she said solemnly, handing it to him. Marcus opened the envelope and found a handmade card inside. On the front, Lily had drawn a picture of a truck and 3 people standing beside it. 2 of them had long dark hair and one had short brown hair and a beard. "That's us," Lily explained, pointing at the figures. "You, me, and Mommy. And that's your truck." Inside the card, written in careful, slightly wobbly letters, were the words, "Thank you for being my friend. Love, Lily." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "This is beautiful, Lily. I'm going to keep it forever." Lily beamed. "Really? Really? It's the best present anyone's ever given me." He sat down at the small kitchen table where Sarah was waiting, a cup of coffee already poured for him. She looked better than she had in weeks, the shadows under her eyes finally beginning to fade. "I have some news," she said, her face breaking into a smile. "I got a job offer today. A law firm in Nashville is looking for a part-time legal secretary. The hours are flexible and they're willing to work around my physical therapy schedule. The pay isn't great, but it's something. Sarah, that's wonderful, Marcus exclaimed. When do you start? Next Monday. It's going to be hard juggling everything, but I think I can make it work. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Marcus. You know that, right? Marcus shook his head. You did all the hard work. I just helped out a little. A little? Sarah laughed. You paid our rent for 3 months. You bought Lily new clothes for school. You drive 2 hours each way just to have dinner with us. That's not a little, Marcus. That's everything. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just squeezed her hand back and smiled. After dinner, while Lily was doing her homework in her room, Sarah turned to Marcus with a serious expression. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why are you doing all this? I mean, I know you're a good person, but there has to be more to it than that. No one goes this far out of their way for strangers without a reason. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. He'd known this question would come eventually, and he'd tried to prepare an answer. But now that the moment was here, he found that the truth was the only thing he could say. I have a daughter, he said finally. Her name is Emily. She's 23 now, but I haven't seen her since she was 8 years old. Same age as Lily. Sarah's eyes widened. What happened? I left. Her mother and I divorced, and instead of fighting for custody, instead of being the father she needed, I just disappeared. I told myself it was better for everyone, but that was a lie. I was scared of failing, scared of hurting her more than I already had. So I ran. And now? Now I'm trying to be better. When I found Lily standing in the rain that night, begging me to save her mother, it was like looking into the past. Like getting a second chance to do things right. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes wet with unshed tears. I can't undo what I did to Emily. I can't get those 15 years back. But I can be here for you and Lily. I can be the person I should have been all along. Sarah reached out and took his hand again, holding it gently. Have you talked to her? To Emily? Marcus nodded. We're still working on it. She's angry, and she has every right to be. But we're talking. We're making progress. She sent me a picture of my grandson last week. His voice cracked on the last word. His name is Oliver. He looks just like she did at that age. Oh, Marcus! Sarah's eyes were shining with tears. That's beautiful. It's more than I deserve, he said quietly, but I'm grateful for it every day. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation settling around them like a warm blanket. Finally, Sarah spoke again. You're a good man, Marcus Williams. Whatever mistakes you made in the past, you're a good man now, and that's what matters. Marcus wanted to believe her. He really did. But there was still a part of him that wondered if he was just fooling himself, if he was just going through the motions of being a good person without actually being one. How could he be sure he wouldn't run again when things got hard? How could he trust himself not to let Sarah and Lily down the way he'd let Emily down? He didn't have answers to those questions, not yet, but he was determined to find them. The months rolled by, each one bringing new challenges and new triumphs. Sarah's leg healed completely, and she graduated from physical therapy with flying colors. Her part-time job at the law firm turned into a full-time position, and she was able to start paying Marcus back for the money he'd loaned her. He tried to refuse, but she insisted, and he finally agreed to let her make small monthly payments just to ease her pride. Lily thrived at her new school, making friends easily and excelling in her classes. She'd developed a passion for reading, devouring books at an astonishing rate, and Marcus made a habit of bringing her new ones every time he visited. They'd started a tradition of reading together before bed, taking turns reading the pages aloud, and it quickly became Marcus's favorite part of the day. Sarah's mother took a turn for the worse in the spring, her Alzheimer's advancing rapidly. Sarah spent long hours at the nursing home, sitting by her mother's bed, holding her hand and talking to her even though she rarely responded. Marcus took on more of the responsibility for Lily during this time, picking her up from school, helping with homework, making dinner. He discovered, to his surprise, that he was actually good at it. Not perfect, certainly. He burned dinner more times than he could count, and he wasn't always patient when Lily struggled with her math homework. But he was there, consistently, day after day, and that was something he'd never been able to say before. One evening, while Lily was eating the slightly burned chicken he'd made, she looked up at him with a thoughtful expression. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Sure, kiddo. What's up? Are you ever going to marry my mom?" Marcus nearly choked on his water. "What? Are you going to marry her?" Lily repeated, as if the question were perfectly reasonable. "Because you're here all the time, and you cook for us and take care of me, and you look at my mom the way my friend Jenny's dad looks at her mom. So I was just wondering." Marcus set down his glass and tried to compose himself. "Lily, it's complicated." "Adults always say that," Lily said with a sigh. "But it doesn't seem complicated to me. You like my mom, and she likes you. What's so hard about that?" Out of the mouths of babes, Marcus thought. He didn't know how to explain to a 7-year-old that love wasn't always simple, that sometimes the people who cared about each other the most were also the ones who were most afraid of getting hurt. He didn't know how to tell her that he was still carrying the weight of his past mistakes, still afraid that he would let her down the way he'd let everyone else down. "Your mom and I are friends," he said finally. "Good friends. And I care about her very much. But there are some things that take time, Lily. We need to get to know each other better before we can think about anything else." Lily considered this for a moment. "Okay," she said, "but I think you should know. I wouldn't mind if you married her. I like having you around." Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest. "I like being around too." Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Marcus sat on the small balcony of the apartment and watched the city lights flickering in the darkness. He thought about what Lily had said, about the way he looked at Sarah, about the feelings he'd been trying so hard to ignore. The truth was, he did love her. He'd been in love with her for months, maybe from that very first night when he'd carried her up from the ravine. But he was terrified of admitting it. Terrified of what it might mean, terrified of the responsibility that came with loving someone. He heard the balcony door slide open behind him, and Sarah stepped out, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Mind if I join you?" "Of course not." She settled into the chair beside him, pulling the blanket tighter against the cool night air. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars. "Lily told me about your conversation," Sarah said finally. Marcus groaned. "Of course she did. She's very perceptive for a 7-year-old. Sarah smiled. "She told me she thinks you should marry me. Kids say the darndest things." "They do, but sometimes they see things more clearly than adults." Sarah turned to face him, her eyes searching his face. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Always. Do you have feelings for me? Romantic feelings, I mean. Because if you do, I need to know. And if you don't, I need to know that too. I can't keep wondering." Marcus took a deep breath. This was it. The moment he'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. "Yes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I do. I've been in love with you for months, Sarah. Maybe longer. But I was afraid to say anything because I didn't want to ruin what we have. I didn't want to lose you." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. "I've been in love with you too," she said softly, "from the moment you climbed down into that ravine to save me. You didn't have to do that. You could have just called for help and waited. But you didn't. You risked your life for a stranger, and that told me everything I needed to know about who you are." Marcus felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. "I'm not a hero, Sarah. I've made so many mistakes. I've hurt so many people." "We've all made mistakes," Sarah said. "What matters is what you do now. And right now you're here. You've been here every day for months. You've been more of a father to Lily than anyone else in her life. That's not nothing, Marcus. That's everything." She leaned in and kissed him, soft and gentle, and Marcus felt the last of his walls crumble away. For the first time in years, he didn't want to run. He wanted to stay. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah was smiling. "So what happens now?" she asked. Marcus thought about the question. He thought about Emily and the relationship they were slowly rebuilding. He thought about Lily and the love he'd come to feel for her. He thought about Sarah and the future they might build together. "I don't know," he admitted, "but whatever it is, I want to figure it out with you." Sarah squeezed his hand. "That sounds perfect." The summer was a time of change and growth for all of them. Marcus talked to his dispatcher and requested a permanent reassignment to the Nashville area, trading his long-haul routes for shorter regional runs that allowed him to be home every night. It meant less money, but it also meant more time with Sarah and Lily, and that was worth more to him than any paycheck. Emily came to visit in July, bringing her husband David and little Oliver with her. Marcus was nervous, pacing the apartment for hours before they arrived, but the reunion was better than he dared to hope. Emily was still guarded, still carrying the scars of his abandonment, but she was willing to try. And when she saw him with Lily, saw the way he'd changed, something in her face softened. "You're different," she said one afternoon, while they were sitting on the balcony watching Oliver play with Lily in the living room. "You're not the same person who left." "I'm trying not to be," Marcus said. "I can't change what I did, Emily, but I can be better now. I'm trying to be better." Emily nodded slowly. "I can see that, and I appreciate it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not ready to call you Dad again, not yet, but maybe we can work up to it." Marcus felt tears threatening again. "I'd like that, very much." Before she left, Emily hugged him. It was awkward at first, both of them unsure of how to fit together after so many years apart. But then she relaxed into his arms, and Marcus held his daughter for the first time in 15 years. "I love you, Emily," he whispered. "I know," she said. "I'm starting to remember that." Sarah's mother passed away in August, quietly, in her sleep. It was a mercy, the doctor said. The Alzheimer's had progressed to the point where she no longer recognized anyone, no longer spoke, no longer seemed aware of the world around her. But for Sarah, it was still a devastating loss. Marcus stood beside her at the funeral, holding her hand as they lowered the casket into the ground. Lily stood on her other side, clutching the stuffed bear that Marcus had given her all those months ago. They were a family now, bound not by blood, but by something stronger, by love, by the determination to face whatever came together. In the weeks that followed, Marcus helped Sarah sort through her mother's belongings, packing up a lifetime of memories into boxes and bags. It was hard, painful work, and there were days when Sarah couldn't do it, when the grief was too fresh and too raw. On those days, Marcus would hold her while she cried, stroking her hair and telling her it was okay to be sad, okay to miss her mother, okay to feel whatever she needed to feel. One evening, while they were going through a box of old photographs, Sarah found a picture of herself as a little girl sitting on her mother's lap. She stared at it for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. "She was a good mom," she said softly. "She wasn't perfect, but she loved me." She always loved me. That's all any of us can do, Marcus said. Love the people we have, for as long as we have them. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. Do you think she knew? At the end, do you think she knew how much I loved her? I think she knew, Marcus said. Even when her mind was gone, her heart remembered. Some things are too deep to forget. Sarah leaned into him, and he held her close. I'm glad you're here, she whispered. I couldn't do this without you. You'll never have to. That fall, Marcus asked Sarah to marry him. It wasn't a grand proposal, no fireworks or flash mobs or viral videos. He simply took her hand one evening while they were sitting on the balcony, watching the sun set over the city, and asked her if she would spend the rest of her life with him. Sarah said yes. Lily was the first person they told, and her reaction was everything Marcus had hoped for. She shrieked with joy, threw her arms around both of them, and immediately started planning the wedding. I want to be the flower girl, she announced, and I want a purple dress. And I want Marcus to be my real dad now, not just my pretend dad. Marcus felt his heart swell. I would love that, Lily, more than anything. The wedding was small, just a few friends and Emily's family, held in the garden of a little chapel outside Nashville. Sarah wore a simple white dress, and Lily scattered rose petals down the aisle with solemn concentration. Emily stood beside Marcus as his best man, or best woman, as she insisted on calling herself. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed Sarah with all the love he'd been holding back for so long. And when he turned to see Lily watching them with shining eyes, he knew that he'd finally found what he'd been searching for his entire life. A family, a home, a reason to stay. The years that followed were not without challenges. Marcus and Sarah had their share of arguments, moments when the stress of daily life threatened to overwhelm them. Emily's relationship with Marcus continued to heal slowly, with setbacks and breakthroughs in equal measure. Lily grew from a little girl into a young woman, with all the drama and turbulence that entailed. But through it all, they held on to each other. They held on to the love that had brought them together on that rainy night so many years ago. And they never forgot where they'd come from, or how far they'd traveled to get here. On the 10th anniversary of the night Marcus had found Lily on the side of the road, they returned to the spot where it had all begun. The highway had been repaved since then, and a new guardrail had been installed. But the trees beyond were the same, and the mountains rose up in the distance, just as they always had. Lily was 17 now, tall and beautiful, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn determination. She was planning to go to college to study medicine, hoping to become a doctor so she could help people the way Marcus had helped her and her mother all those years ago. Marcus stood at the guardrail, looking out at the spot where the car had gone over, and felt Sarah's hand slip into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything," he said. "That night. What my life was like before. What it's become since." He turned to look at her, at the woman who had changed everything. "I was so lost before I met you. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know if I was worth saving." "You saved us," Sarah reminded him. "You could have just driven by, like everyone else, but you stopped. You saw a little girl who needed help, and you stopped." "And she saved me right back," Marcus said. He looked at Lily, who was standing a few feet away, scrolling through her phone with the casual indifference of a teenager. "She saved me right back." Lily looked up, catching his gaze. For a moment he saw the little girl she had been, standing in the rain with that desperate look in her eyes. And then she smiled, and she was herself again, the young woman who had grown up calling him Dad, who had taught him what it meant to love someone more than yourself. "What?" she asked. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "Just remembering," Marcus said. "Just remembering how it all started. Lily rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "You're so sentimental." "I know." "I can't help it." She walked over and hugged him, the way she'd done 1,000 times before, the way she'd done that first night in the hospital waiting room when she'd fallen asleep against his arm. "I love you, Dad," she said. "I love you too, kiddo." They stood there for a while longer, the three of them, looking out at the mountains and the sky and the road that stretched into the distance. So much had changed since that night 10 years ago. So much had been lost and so much more had been found. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here. The years of running, the years of hiding, the years of pretending he didn't need anyone. He thought about the moment when a little girl had grabbed his sleeve and whispered those words that had changed everything. "Please, save my mother." He had saved her. They had saved each other. And in doing so, they had become a family. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Marcus put his arm around Sarah and felt her lean into him, warm and solid and real. "Ready to go home?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, let's go home." They walked back to the car together, the three of them, leaving the past behind and heading toward whatever came next. And as Marcus drove away from that stretch of highway, he took one last look in the rearview mirror at the spot where his life had changed forever. A little girl, a desperate plea, a choice that had made all the difference. He turned his eyes back to the road ahead and smiled. Whatever came next, he was ready for it, because he wasn't alone anymore. He had his family, he had his home, he had everything he'd ever wanted, and this time he was never going to let it go. The evening air was crisp as Marcus pulled into the driveway of their modest house on the outskirts of Nashville. It wasn't a big house, just 3 bedrooms and a small backyard, but it was theirs. They'd bought it together 5 years ago, and every room held memories. Lily's height marks on the kitchen doorframe, the patch on the living room wall where Sarah had tried to hang a shelf and missed the stud, the worn spot on the couch where Marcus always sat to watch the evening news. Home. The word still felt strange on his tongue sometimes, even after all these years. For so long, home had been the cab of his truck, a different highway every night, a different town every morning. He'd convinced himself that he liked it that way, that he was meant for the road and nothing else. Now he knew better. Inside, the house was warm and smelled like the pot roast Sarah had put in the slow cooker that morning. Lily immediately disappeared upstairs to her room, muttering something about homework, and Marcus and Sarah found themselves alone in the kitchen. "Wine?" Sarah asked, reaching for the bottle on the counter. "Please." They settled onto the back porch, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance in the gathering dusk. This was their ritual, their time to decompress from the day and just be together. No phones, no distractions, just the two of them and the quiet evening air. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night?" Sarah asked, swirling the wine in her glass. Marcus considered the question. He'd thought about it a lot over the years, especially in the early days. What if he'd been 5 minutes later? What if he'd been driving a different route? What if he'd done what everyone else had done and just kept going? "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. What matters is that I did stop. I found you and Lily, and everything changed. For the better, definitely for the better." He reached over and took her hand. "I was a ghost before I met you, Sarah. I was just going through the motions, pretending to be alive. You and Lily gave me a reason to live, a reason to be better." Sarah squeezed his hand. "You were always a good man, Marcus. You just needed someone to remind you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Marcus thought about all the miles he'd driven in his life, all the places he'd been, all the people he'd met and forgotten. And he thought about how all of it, every road and every mile, had led him here. "I talked to Emily today," he said. Sarah's eyes lit up. "How is she? How's Oliver?" "Good. Great, actually. Oliver's starting kindergarten next month." She sent me a picture of him in his new backpack. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Sarah the image. "Look at him. He's getting so big." "He looks just like you," Sarah said with a smile. "Same stubborn jaw." Marcus laughed. "Emily says the same thing. She claims it skipped a generation. Is she coming for Thanksgiving again this year?" "She's planning on it. David's family wants them for Christmas, so Thanksgiving works better for us." He paused, a warmth spreading through his chest. "She asked if Lily wanted to come visit them in Denver over spring break. Said Oliver's been asking about his big cousin." Sarah's smile widened. "That's wonderful, Marcus. Look how far you've come." He nodded, still marveling at it himself. 3 years ago, Emily had started calling him Dad again. It had been gradual, a slow thaw after years of ice, but when she'd finally said the word, Marcus had cried like a baby. Now they talked at least once a week, and he'd become a regular presence in Oliver's life. The grandson he'd never thought he'd know, the daughter he'd thought he'd lost forever, both of them back in his life, part of his family again. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, still topics they couldn't discuss without tension, but it was real, and it was growing stronger every day. The back door opened, and Lily stepped out onto the porch. "Dinner ready yet? I'm starving." "Just about," Sarah said, standing up. "Want to help me set the table?" Lily groaned dramatically, but followed her mother inside, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts for a moment longer. He looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere out there, the highway stretched on forever, carrying trucks and travelers and stories he would never know. That life called to him sometimes, the freedom of the open road, the simplicity of having nowhere to be and no one to answer to. But then he heard Lily laugh inside, heard Sarah's voice responding with something that made them both crack up. And he knew he wouldn't trade this for anything, not the road, not the freedom, not all the miles in the world. This was where he belonged. Dinner was a lively affair, filled with stories about Lily's classes and Sarah's work and Marcus's latest delivery run. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm over the years, a dance of conversation and comfortable silence that felt as natural as breathing. "So," Lily said, pushing her empty plate away, "I've been thinking about my college essay." "Oh, yeah?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "What's the topic?" "I have to write about a person who's influenced my life." Lily looked at him, her dark eyes serious. "I want to write about you." Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "Me? Why me?" "Because you changed everything." Lily's voice was steady, mature beyond her years. "Before you came along, it was just me and Mom, struggling to survive. We didn't have anyone, and then you stopped on the side of the road, and you saved us, and you never left. You became my dad, and you showed me what it means to be there for someone, to really be there, no matter what." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Lily, I know you think you're not special," she continued. "I know you think you just did what anyone would do, but you didn't. You chose to stop when everyone else drove by. You chose to climb down into that ravine. You chose to stay. And that's what I want to write about, the power of choosing." Sarah reached over and took Marcus's hand, her eyes shining with tears. "I don't know what to say," Marcus managed. "You don't have to say anything." Lily smiled. "Just promise me you'll read it when I'm done, and that you won't get too embarrassed." Marcus laughed, wiping at his eyes. "I'll try. But I make no promises about the embarrassment." Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed and Sarah was reading in the living room, Marcus stepped out onto the front porch. The night was cool and quiet, the kind of stillness that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He thought about what Lily had said. The power of choosing. It was such a simple idea, but it contained everything he'd learned over the past decade. That life wasn't about what happened to you, but about what you did with it. That every moment was an opportunity to be better, to do better, to choose differently than you had before. He'd made a lot of wrong choices in his life. He'd run when he should have stayed. He'd hidden when he should have faced his fears. He'd let the people he loved slip away because he was too scared to hold on, but he'd also made some right choices. He'd stopped on the side of the road. He'd climbed down into the ravine. He'd stayed when every instinct told him to run, and those choices had led him here, to this porch, to this house, to this family that had become everything to him. The screen door creaked behind him, and Sarah stepped out, wrapping a cardigan around her shoulders. "You okay?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Yeah," Marcus said, "just thinking." "About what?" "About how lucky I am." He turned to look at her, this woman who had given him a second chance at life. "I don't deserve any of this, you know. I don't deserve you or Lily or this life we've built, but I'm grateful for it every single day." Sarah leaned over and kissed him softly. "You deserve all of it, Marcus. You just had to learn how to accept it." They sat together in the darkness, watching the stars, and Marcus felt a peace settle over him that he'd spent his whole life searching for. It wasn't perfect. Life never was. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome, moments of doubt and fear and pain, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He had his family, he had his home, he had love, and that was enough. That was everything. The clock on the wall struck midnight, and somewhere in the distance a truck horn sounded on the highway. Marcus smiled, remembering the countless nights he'd been the one behind that wheel, alone and lost, and searching for something he couldn't name. He'd found it now. Not on the road, but in the eyes of a little girl standing in the rain. In the arms of a woman who had taught him how to love again. In the home they'd built together, brick by brick, choice by choice. It had all started with a whisper in the storm. "Please, save my mother." And in saving her, he had saved himself. The end of the road wasn't really an end at all. It was a beginning. The beginning of something Marcus had never thought he'd find. A life worth living. As he sat there on the porch, watching the night sky and listening to the sounds of his home settling around him, Marcus Williams finally understood what it meant to belong, not to a place or a road or a schedule, but to people, to the ones who loved you despite your flaws, to the ones who saw you for who you really were and loved you anyway. He'd spent 50 years running from that truth, but now, at last, he was home, and he was never going to run again. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of autumn day that made everything feel possible. Marcus woke early, as he always did, and made his way to the kitchen to start the coffee. Sarah would be down soon, and Lily after that, both of them moving through their morning routines with the comfortable familiarity of family. As he waited for the coffee to brew, Marcus looked out the window at the backyard, where the leaves were just beginning to turn. In a few weeks, they'd be raking those leaves together, the three of them, laughing and throwing handfuls at each other like children. It was another tradition they'd built over the years, another small piece of the life they'd created together. He thought about the day ahead. He had a short run to Knoxville, just a few hours there and back. Easy work. The kind of driving he'd come to prefer in these later years. No more 18-hour days, no more weeks away from home. Just enough to keep busy, to feel useful, to contribute to the household without sacrificing the time with his family. The coffee finished brewing and he poured himself a cup, savoring the warmth and the bitter richness. Outside, a cardinal landed on the fence post, its red feathers brilliant against the brown wood. Marcus watched it for a moment, appreciating the simple beauty of the morning. Sarah came downstairs a few minutes later, her hair still mussed from sleep, and Marcus handed her a cup of coffee without being asked. She took it with a grateful smile and settled into her chair at the kitchen table. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Like a log. You?" "Same." He sat down across from her. "I was thinking about what Lily said last night, about her essay." Sarah nodded. "It's beautiful, isn't it? That she wants to write about you. I still can't quite believe it." Marcus shook his head. "I keep waiting to wake up and realize this was all a dream, that I'm still on the road somewhere, alone." "It's not a dream, Marcus." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "This is real. We're real, and we're not going anywhere." He squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin, the solidity of her presence. She was right. This was real. After all these years, he could finally believe it. Lily came downstairs a few minutes later, bleary-eyed and grumbling about the early hour. She grabbed a granola bar from the pantry and slumped into her chair, the picture of teenage reluctance. "Morning, sunshine," Marcus said with a grin. "Too early," Lily muttered, but there was no real complaint in her voice. They ate breakfast together, the three of them, talking about the day ahead and the week to come. Lily had a biology test on Thursday that she was nervous about. Sarah had a big meeting at work that could lead to a promotion. Marcus told them about his run to Knoxville and promised to bring back pie from that little diner they all loved. It was ordinary, mundane, the kind of morning that happened thousands of times in thousands of homes across the country. But to Marcus, it was everything. After breakfast, he kissed Sarah goodbye and hugged Lily, promising to be home in time for dinner. Then he climbed into his truck and pulled out of the driveway, heading toward the highway that had been his home for so many years. The road stretched out before him, familiar and welcoming. He'd driven these highways 1,000 times, knew every curve and hill, every rest stop and roadside attraction. But it felt different now. It wasn't an escape anymore, a way of running from his problems. It was just a job, a way to pay the bills and put food on the table. A way to contribute to the life he'd built with his family. As he drove, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here. All the miles he'd covered, all the places he'd been, all the people he'd met along the way. He thought about the loneliness of those early years, the sense of being adrift in a world that didn't need him, and he thought about the night that had changed everything. The rain, the storm, the little girl standing on the side of the road, her hand reaching out to grab his sleeve. "Please, save my mother." Those words had saved him as much as they'd saved Sarah and Lily. They'd given him a purpose, a reason to be better, a chance to become the man he'd always wanted to be. He smiled as the highway opened up before him, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. There were still miles to go, still roads to travel, still adventures waiting around every bend. But for the first time in his life, Marcus wasn't running from anything. He was running toward it, toward home, toward family, toward love, toward the life he'd never known he wanted, until a little girl had shown him the way. The road stretched on, endless and full of promise. And Marcus Williams, former wanderer, former ghost, drove on with a heart full of gratitude and a smile on his face, because he knew at last exactly where he belonged, and it was the best feeling in the world.